Welcome to this course, Introduction to Cybersecurity Literacy. This is Lesson 22, Wireless Network Basics. In this lesson, I will introduce you to wireless networks. In later lessons, we'll talk about the security risks associated with wireless networks, and I'll suggest some ways in which you can use and administer wireless security networks more securely. But we'll start here with a few brief words on how wireless internet connections work. Wireless internet connections go by several names: Wi-Fi, Wireless Ethernet, and IEEE 802.11a, 802.11b, 802.11g, or 802.11n. For our purposes, all these describe the same thing: the wireless connections that allow your devices to connect with a wireless internet router, and through this router, to communicate with the whole internet. These types of connections are distinct from cellular internet connections, which do not have the same security risks as Wi-Fi connections. In this class, when we talk about wireless networks, we're going to stick to the traffic traveling between a Wi-Fi enabled device, normally a computer, a tablet, or a smartphone, and a wireless internet router. To be clear, the issues we're introducing are relevant to your phone when your phone is on Wi-Fi, but they probably aren't relevant to your phone when you're using your phone's mobile data connection. Operating systems for Wi-Fi enabled devices will have some kind of wireless connection manager program. For example, this illustration shows the Wireless Connection Manager application that runs on the Windows 7 operating system. On the left side of the window, you can see a list of Service Set Identifiers, or SSIDs. An SSID is also commonly referred to as the router's name, or the network's name. How does your computer know which wireless routers are in range at a given time? Simple. Wireless routers emit signals that broadcast their SSID. They are constantly advertising their own availability. Over on the right side of the window, we can see the signal strength for each network. Devices on Wi-Fi networks, both routers and computers, work by transmitting information through radio waves. These green bars let users know how strong the radio signal is between the router and the computer. In Windows 7, unsecure wireless networks are marked with a yellow exclamation point icon. Routers and computers have the ability to encrypt their transmissions. An encrypted signal means that even if somebody intercepts your Wi-Fi traffic, they shouldn't be able to read it. But this yellow icon tells you that transmissions to and from this network will not enjoy such encryption. Let me repeat that. This yellow icon means that the information carried by the radio waves between the computer and the router will not be automatically encrypted. Let's see what happens when a user selects one of the networks from the list. When a user selects an SSID, the application asks whether the user wants to connect to a given network, and it reminds the user whether or not the requested network is secure. If a user chooses to connect to an unsecure wireless network, the computer should make the connection automatically. If it's a secure network, then the router will ask for a security key before allowing it to connect. If you are connected to a Wi-Fi network, it's worth remembering that all of the information that travels from your computer to the router and from the router back to your computer is transmitted via radio waves. These radio waves move out in every direction from their source. And they don't stop when they reach their intended destination. They will keep radiating out for a long ways. A wireless eavesdropper does not have to be seated between you and your router to pick up your wireless transmissions. They just need to be within the range of your Wi-Fi radio. And remember, radio waves are easy to intercept. All you need is the right kind of radio, and you can detect the waves. How far do Wi-Fi signals travel? Well, they usually go about 100 to 300 feet in every direction, depending on conditions and obstructions. To put that in perspective, here's what a 100-foot broadcast radius looks like compared to a football field. For perspective, here's what a 300-foot broadcast radius looks like. It's worth mentioning that with special equipment, people can sometimes detect Wi-Fi signals from even further away, say about 1,000 feet. Remember that radio waves go out in every direction, including up and down. So people who are above you in a tall building or below you in a basement may also intercept Wi-Fi signals. Okay, that's all for now. In the next lesson, we'll cover a number of wireless internet security threats that you should be aware of and that you should learn to protect yourself against. Welcome to this course, Introduction to Cybersecurity Literacy. This is Lesson 23, Wireless Internet Security Threats. In this lecture, we're going to introduce some of the most common security threats that wireless users have to deal with. We'll discuss the following 4 wireless security threats: sniffing, rogue routers, evil twin routers, and unauthorized connections. At the beginning here, I'm going to remind you that these threats apply to Wi-Fi internet, but they do not apply to mobile cellular networks, which use different technologies besides Wi-Fi. So, when you're using Wi-Fi on your phone, this lesson applies. But when you're using data on your phone, it probably doesn't. Wireless security threat number 1 is sniffing. Have you ever seen a movie where somebody is having a private telephone conversation on a landline telephone, and then somebody else picks up a different phone somewhere else in the house and eavesdrops on that conversation? Wireless sniffing is a similar kind of eavesdropping that can happen on public, wireless internet connections. If you're in, say, a coffee shop surfing the web, a cybercriminal within range of that wireless network can use a variety of methods to intercept the signals between your computer and the wireless router. They can intercept the information that is sent from the wireless router to your computer, and they can also intercept the information that your computer sends back to the wireless router. By default, computers are configured not to sniff, but there is free and legal software that can reconfigure a computer to run in what is known as promiscuous mode. A promiscuous computer sniffs all of the wireless traffic on a network. For those of you who are watching this lesson as part of a class that uses this textbook, there's a diagram in Chapter 9 that illustrates what we're talking about. We'll look at that diagram here. If you aren't using this textbook, don't worry about it, just follow along with the lesson. This illustration shows how computers normally function on a network. That is, when they're not sniffing traffic. Over on the right side of the page, we have a wireless router that has been named MSP Wireless. We also have 3 computers connected to this wireless network: User 1, User 2, and Alice's computer. The red dotted line here represents Alice's computer sending a packet of information to the router. It's requesting the homepage for CNN.com. Normally, this information goes out in all directions and is readable by every device on the network. But computers are normally configured to ignore this kind of information, so only Alice's computer and the router are actually involved in the transaction. User 1 and User 2 are configured to ignore Alice's computer's Wi-Fi traffic. Here's an illustration that shows the same situation, only one computer has been configured into promiscuous mode. When Alice submits her password, which is the word bananas, to the website that she's trying to log into, her password information is available to every device on the wireless network. User number 1 is still ignoring this information, which is what he or she is supposed to do. The router is still listening to this information, which is what it's supposed to do, but user number 2 has now turned into sniffer number 1. This user is secretly observing Alice's login credentials. Alice can prevent sniffing in several ways. One is to use a secure wireless network. On a secure wireless network, all users on the network still have access to each other's internet traffic, but this traffic is encrypted so that other users aren't able to read it. Another way to prevent sniffing is to stick to websites that use HTTPS. HTTPS is a set of communication rules that some internet-connected devices use to communicate with each other. HTTPS encrypts all traffic between users and a given web page. Again, the traffic is still sniffable on the wireless network, but it's garbled by the encryption. Finally, users may negate sniffing by using a virtual private network or VPN. I won't go into the details of VPNs here, but suffice it to say that VPNs are another method of internet encryption that renders internet traffic unreadable to all but designated members of a network. So, in short, the solution to sniffing is encryption. All 3 of these techniques are different ways of encrypting wireless traffic. The radio waves that carry your wireless internet signal will always be out in the public airspace for anybody to intercept. But if your data is encrypted, it will be meaningless and useless to those potential sniffers. Wireless security threat number 2 is rogue routers. A rogue router is an illegitimate router. Attackers set up rogue routers so that they can prey on casual internet users who connect to those routers. A cybercriminal might come along and set up a rogue router anywhere where people expect there to be free Wi-Fi. So, for example, airports are popular locations for rogue routers. Attackers will give the rogue routers plausible names like free airport Wi-Fi so that they can attract users to connect to them. But once users are connected, the attackers simply use those rogue routers to sniff the wireless traffic on them. They might even ask users to set up user accounts for the network, and in this way, the attackers try to snatch usernames, passwords, and other identification information from unwitting users. In fact, because some airports charge for Wi-Fi, some attackers will even go so far as to charge users to work on the rogue routers. Users will pay these fees because they were expecting to pay a fee anyway, so the victims are charged a fee to be cyber attacked. Rogue routers are particularly tricky at travel hubs like airports and bus stations. In those situations, travelers are vulnerable. They have little time and very few resources to spend on their own cyber defense. Furthermore, the attackers that set up routers in transportation hubs may also be travelers themselves. They might not live anywhere near the place that they're attacking, and after a couple of hours of sniffing and fishing, they might simply hop on a plane and fly to the next targeted airport. But although rogue routers are particularly nasty at travel hubs, they are by no means limited to travel hubs. Rogue routers might appear anywhere where you would expect to find a potential cluster of wireless networks. Maybe coffee shops, public squares, apartment buildings, or other places like that. So you might be thinking, gee, it sounds like any public router could be a rogue router. And it's certainly possible. Between rogue routers and unsecure networks, public Wi-Fi connections can be pretty dicey. Now, this isn't to say that you should avoid them entirely, but you should definitely proceed with caution anytime you connect to a public Wi-Fi network. Wireless security threat number 3 is evil twin routers. A close relative to the rogue router is the evil twin router. Like a rogue router, an evil twin router is a router that has been set up for the purpose of attacking users. With an evil twin router, cybercriminals take advantage of people who allow their computers to automatically connect to a public network. For example, a college or university might have a campus-wide wireless internet connection named University Wi-Fi. Routers connecting to that network are probably installed in strategic locations all across campus. Attackers will sometimes set up alternate routers with the exact same name as a known legitimate network. So if your computer is set up to automatically connect to the network named Library Wi-Fi, it will connect to whatever router it finds with that name. If there's more than one router with that name, it will connect to the one with the strongest signal. If the evil twin router happens to be the strongest connection from where you're working, your computer might automatically connect to the evil twin router without you knowing it. Once you're connected to the evil twin router, you are susceptible to all of the familiar attacks, especially wireless sniffing. Wireless security threat number 4 is unauthorized connections. So far, we have discussed wireless networks from the perspective of a user who's connecting to a publicly available network. Now, let's consider an important security issue that comes up for wireless router owners who manage their own wireless networks at home. This issue is unauthorized connections. If you have an unsecure wireless network at home, you leave your home network open to unauthorized connections by neighbors or anybody else within the broadcast radius of your router. This practice of connecting to unsecured wireless networks without the owner's permission is sometimes called piggybacking. In many cases, piggybacking is more of a nuisance than a threat. That's because having extra users connected to your router can slow down your internet connection. But there can be other costs associated with piggybacking as well: financial costs, security costs, and legal costs. You could incur financial costs from piggybacking if your internet plan includes a monthly limit on the amount of data that you can download or upload. If you have a data limit, then you probably don't want to unknowingly share your internet connection with piggybackers, such as neighbors or people parked on the street near your home. There can also be security costs to piggybacking. Unauthorized network users might be able to access your router's settings and change them to make your network less secure. And as per usual, you have to consider the possibility of sniffing attacks from other users connected to the network. Perhaps most importantly, there are potential legal consequences to piggybacking. If somebody connects to the internet from your router, then all of their online activity can be traced back to your network. Any illegal activities that they participate in, such as uploading or downloading malware, pirating media, or downloading illegal pornography, will appear to be happening in your home. For example, back in 2011, the FBI raided the home of a man in Buffalo, New York on the suspicion that he was downloading child pornography. The ensuing investigation eventually revealed that a neighbor had used the man's unsecure wireless connection to download the pornography. So fortunately, in this case, the innocent man didn't get into serious trouble, but his unsecure wireless network made him a suspect in a very serious criminal investigation that could have had dire consequences if he hadn't been vindicated. Even if your neighbors are all good, trustworthy people, it still pays to secure your home wireless network. Some cybercriminals drive around neighborhoods looking for unsecure networks that they can exploit. Okay, let's review. We've introduced 4 wireless security threats: sniffing, rogue routers, evil twin routers, and unauthorized connections. All of these threats are relevant to Wi-Fi internet connections, but they don't necessarily apply to mobile cellular networks. In the next lesson, we'll discuss public Wi-Fi connections and talk a little more about what you can do to use them safely. Welcome to this course, Introduction to Cybersecurity Literacy. This is Lesson 24, Using Public Wireless Networks. In the last lesson, we looked at a few examples of wireless security threats. With these threats in mind, I want to suggest some tips that will help you to use public wireless internet connections more securely. These tips are to refrain from using unsecure network connections for private business, to obscure your computer screen and keyboard, to know whether your connection is secure, to use websites that use HTTPS, and to use a virtual private network, also known as a VPN. Wireless security tip number 1 is to refrain from using public networks for private business. It can be difficult to tell whether a public Wi-Fi connection is legitimate. Sometimes users think they're connecting to a legitimate network, but they're really connecting to an evil twin router or a rogue router, either of which could allow a cybercriminal to sniff one's internet traffic. The simplest, most effective solution to this problem is to refrain from using public networks for private business. Save your private business, like banking, shopping, or anything that requires you to submit login credentials, for a time when you can connect to a secure, private network. We recognize that this is not always the most convenient solution, but by limiting your activity on public networks, you significantly lower your chances of being attacked. Wireless security tip number 2 is to obscure your computer screen and your keyboard. Peeking over somebody's shoulder is a pretty low-tech cyber attack, but it can be an effective one. Cybercriminals will position themselves so that they can see a user's computer, and they'll watch the screen. Or they could watch the keyboard and observe private information like passwords or account numbers as they're typed. You might be surprised how proficient some people are at watching and reading your keystrokes. So, when you use the internet in public, be aware of your surroundings. Position yourself so that it's difficult to see your device, and pay attention to people as they change seating around you. If possible, try to stake out a seat against a wall to prevent people from sitting behind you. Wireless security tip number 3 is to know whether your connection is secure. You should know whether you're using a secure or unsecure wireless network. Your operating system should tell you whether or not you're connecting to a secure wireless network. For example, the Windows 7 operating system will list your available wireless connections in a frame that looks like this. Unsecure wireless connections will display a small, yellow warning icon. Secure connections will display no warning, and if you try to connect to them, they should require you to enter a security key. If the network is unsecure, you should probably avoid using it to do any private business. If the network is secure, then it's still possible for anybody else connected to the network to intercept your Wi-Fi signal, but that signal will be encrypted, and therefore it will be more difficult to interpret. So figure out how your device indicates whether or not wireless connections are secure, and always be aware of whether or not you're connecting to a secure network. Wireless security tip number 4 is to use websites that use HTTPS. When computers communicate with each other, they have to stick to a very strict set of communication rules. These sets of rules are called protocols. When your computer communicates with a web server over the internet, they use a protocol called HTTP, which stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. HTTP is designed to transmit web code back and forth between computers in clear, easily readable text. However, there's another version of HTTP called HTTPS, which stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure. With HTTPS, all traffic between your computer and a web server is encrypted. This means that even if somebody intercepts the signal somewhere between your computer and the web server, it will be unreadable to them. Many websites use HTTPS for their login pages so that your login credentials are secure as they move across the internet. If you're going to submit sensitive information online, you should make sure that you're using a web page that uses HTTPS. Most browsers display the address bar differently for a web page that uses HTTP than it does for a web page that uses HTTPS. Here's what the difference looks like on Firefox. The page on top uses HTTP, and the page on bottom uses the more secure HTTPS. Notice the green padlock and security certificate on the HTTPS page. Here are the same two pages shown as they would display in Google Chrome. Again, HTTP is on top and HTTPS is on bottom. Notice once again the green security certificate and padlock icon on the HTTPS page. You should be aware that HTTPS helps to protect you from eavesdropping, but HTTPS can't protect you from malicious websites. Not every website that uses HTTPS is safe. It's just that using HTTPS will protect you from wireless eavesdropping. Wireless security tip number 5 is to use a virtual private network or VPN. Not everybody uses a VPN or even has access to one, but for people who do, a VPN is a strong privacy and security tool. Let's take a look at how VPNs work. Here, we have a computer on a wireless network that wants to connect to a web server through the internet. We'll use blue arrows here to indicate that, for whatever reason, none of the connections between these devices are encrypted. So, unencrypted traffic might start with the computer, travel to the wireless router, travel through the twists and turns of the internet, and end up at a web server. And then the web server might send a response back to the computer. None of this will necessarily be encrypted. But now let's imagine that this is happening on a VPN. A VPN creates an encrypted connection between your computer and some other private network. This private network might be a home network, or it could be something else like a corporate network that you use at work. A VPN lets you connect privately to this network even if you're on some other network somewhere else in the world. We'll use red arrows to indicate that the connections between these points are encrypted. All of your web traffic on a VPN gets relayed through the private network. So if the computer on the left wanted to communicate with the unsecure web server at the top of the screen, it would do so through the secure connection with the private network. So all of the internet traffic starting at the computer would be encrypted. This encrypted traffic would remain encrypted as it moved across the internet to the private network. Then the private network relays the traffic to wherever it's supposed to go. At this point, it may become unencrypted. The web server would send its response back to the private network. The private network would encrypt the response and send it back to the user on the left side of the screen. To use a VPN, you need special VPN software to create the encrypted connection between your wireless device and a trusted private network. Some people create VPNs using their own home networks. Others pay VPN services for access to large, for-profit VPN networks. A few people use VPNs to connect to their workplace networks when they're out of the office. VPNs do a good job of protecting users from wireless sniffing. But remember that a VPN can't protect users from people looking over their shoulders. Neither will they protect you if you connect to a malicious website. However, if you simply must perform private business over a public Wi-Fi connection, then the safest way to do so is to use a VPN. Okay, let's review. We've covered 5 tips for safer browsing on public wireless networks. These 5 tips were to refrain from using public networks for private business, to obscure your computer screen and keyboard so people can't watch what you're doing, to know whether your connection is secure, to use websites that use HTTPS, and to use a virtual private network or VPN. In the next video, we will discuss some security topics for wireless network administrators, especially people who administer a home wireless network. Welcome to this course, Introduction to Cybersecurity Literacy. This is Lesson 25, Administering Wireless Networks. Many of you probably have your own wireless networks in your own homes. The primary security threat for home Wi-Fi networks is unauthorized access, sometimes called piggybacking. If somebody accesses your wireless network without you knowing it, they can potentially sniff your wireless traffic while you're using your devices at home. Perhaps even worse, they could use your internet connection to commit cybercrimes, such as fraud or buying and selling drugs. Such activities could be traced back to your router. Attackers know this. Some of them even drive around neighborhoods looking for unsecured wireless connections. Sometimes, when cybercriminals find good, accessible, unsecure connections, they will post them on online maps that direct a criminal community towards good places to access unsecure Wi-Fi. Knowing these potential threats, it's a good idea to keep your wireless network secure. In this lesson, we'll cover 6 network administration tips that can help you to keep your wireless network as secure as possible. Use a strong router password, enable wireless security encryption, enable router firewalls, disable SSID broadcast, filter MAC addresses, and turn off your router. Network administration tip number 1 is to use a strong router password. To access and to change the security settings on a router, a user will type in the router's IP address into a web browser, and this address will pull up the router's administration page. The settings on this administration page are usually password protected, so that not just anybody can change the security settings on your router. Most routers come from the factory with a default password, and many users never bother to change this password. You should make sure that you've changed your router password to a strong password that you'll be able to remember. Attackers often know the default administration passwords for various routers. If they have the administration password for your router, then attackers can potentially log into your router as an administrator and then change your security settings to their liking. For guidance on choosing a strong password, I recommend that you go back and watch Lesson 11, which is titled Choosing a Strong Password. Network administration tip number 2 is to enable wireless signal encryption. Most routers come with some kind of security option that will allow you to encrypt the wireless radio signals between your computer and your router. Make sure that this option is enabled on your router, and make sure that you're using the strongest encryption options that are available to you. The most secure encryption option currently available is called WPA2. This option won't be available on some older routers or maybe for some older computers, but if it is available, then you should use it. The next most secure encryption option is called WPA. It's a step down, but it's better than nothing. The least most secure encryption option is called WEP. Some older computers cannot read either WPA2 or WPA, and so for those computers, WEP will have to do. WEP is the weakest encryption option available, but it's still a little better than no encryption at all. Network administration tip number 3 is to enable router firewalls. As you may remember from other lessons, Firewalls protect computers from receiving unauthorized and unrequested traffic through their internet connections. Your computer probably has a firewall, but your router probably also has a firewall. It's a good idea to keep your router's firewall turned on, even if you have another firewall running on your computer. There's no real downside to having multiple firewalls running at any given time, and running multiple firewalls has some advantages. Your router firewall might have strengths that cover the weaknesses of your computer's firewall. Network administration tip number 4 is to disable SSID broadcast. Every router has a name. A router's name is also called its service set identifier, or SSID. The SSID is the name that appears on your computer's network management application when you search for available wireless networks. Routers come factory configured so that they broadcast the SSID for everybody to see. This configuration makes sense for public internet connections, such as the one that you would find in a cafe or at an airport. It makes less sense for private internet connections in your home. If you already know the SSID that you want to connect to, then your computer can find and connect to it without the router broadcasting the SSID out to the public. Network administrators can disable SSID broadcast on a router. With this broadcast disabled, it's more difficult for outside attackers to even see whether you have a Wi-Fi connection in your house or apartment. They will likely just pass over you if you aren't broadcasting your SSID. Network administration tip number 5 is to filter MAC addresses. Internet-ready computers connect to the internet through a network card that plugs into the computer's motherboard. Every network card has a unique address called a Media Access Control Address, or MAC address. You should note that the word MAC in this context doesn't have anything in particular to do with Mac computers associated with Apple technologies. This resemblance is just a coincidence. Every internet-ready computer, be it a Mac, a PC, or anything else, will be associated with a unique MAC address. Most routers can filter computers by their MAC addresses. Such a feature is a powerful security tool. If this feature is enabled on your router, then only computers with approved MAC addresses can access your Wi-Fi connection. You will be able to add and to remove MAC address permissions in your router's administrative settings. Network administration tip number 6 is to turn off your router. It's a good idea to turn off your router if you're not going to be using it for an extended period of time. Attackers can't attack a router that's turned off. As an added bonus, you'll save a few dollars on electricity every year if you turn off your router while you're asleep or while you're away from home. Okay, let's review. We've covered 6 network administration tips: using a strong router password, enabling wireless signal encryption, enabling router firewalls, disabling SSID broadcast, filtering MAC addresses, and turning off your router. That's all of the tips that I have for you for now. If you have a router, you should go play with it. See if you can adjust any of the settings that I've recommended here. If you have trouble, try searching the web for a user's manual or for a helpful forum that answers your questions. Once you figure out how to access your router's administrative settings, and once you familiarize yourself with the administration page, I imagine that you'll find that the tips in this lecture are pretty easy to put into practice. In the next video, we're going to discuss some security considerations for users of social media.